Imagine standing in a dark hall, lit only by torches. The air smells of burning wood and fear. People are gathered, whispering about a marriage, but not the kind you know. These were rituals so shocking, so unbelievable, that history itself tried to bury them. From unions with the dead, to ceremonies with animals, to rituals soaked in blood, these marriages were not celebrations of love. They were trials of survival, curses of tradition, and sometimes tools of raw power. Tonight, we open the hidden book of history. These are 18 bizarre marriage rituals you won't believe actually existed.
In some parts of China, even death could not stop a wedding. Families believed that an unmarried son who died would bring misfortune. His restless spirit would wander forever. The solution? Find him a bride. The ritual was called a ghost marriage. Parents would search for a woman who had also died unmarried. Sometimes they bought her corpse from another grieving family. 2 coffins were placed side by side. The dead man and the dead woman were married, with incense, paper offerings, and whispered prayers. The belief was chilling. Only by binding 2 lonely souls could peace return to the living family. But here's the darker truth. Sometimes families were so desperate that they stole fresh corpses from graves. There were even cases of murder where women were killed just to be sold as ghost brides. A marriage of shadows, a union without life. Yet to the living, it was considered a duty of honor.
Deep inside the jungles of Indonesia, the Mentawai tribe believed beauty was not in bright clothes or golden ornaments, but in sharp, perfect teeth. For them, marriage was not complete until the bride's teeth were filed down. Picture the scene. The girl sits on a wooden floor, surrounded by women humming ancient songs. A sharp stone or metal tool is pressed against her teeth. No medicine, no comfort, just pain. One by one, her teeth are filed until they are short, even, and smooth. Blood drips onto the floor, mixing with the smell of burning herbs. Why? Because to the Mentawai, sharp teeth symbolized animal instincts, wild and uncontrolled. Filing them meant transforming the bride into a proper woman ready for marriage. Only then was she considered pure, beautiful, and worthy of a husband. The screams were not shameful, they were proof of endurance, proof that she could survive marriage itself. In parts of Central Africa, marriage was not sealed with flowers or blessings. It was tested with blood. Before a wedding, the bride and groom were forced to endure a ritual called the trial by whip. Villagers gathered in a wide circle. Drums echoed through the air, their rhythm slow and haunting. The couple stood at the center, trembling. Then, relatives of each side stepped forward, holding long whips made of rawhide. With a sharp crack, the lashes began. The groom was struck first, his back burning with pain. Then the bride. No one was allowed to cry out. To scream was weakness. To bleed in silence was strength. The belief was terrifying. If the couple could endure pain together, they could endure marriage together. The ritual ended only when the elders declared them strong enough. Their bodies were marked with deep cuts. But to the village, those scars were not shame. They were proof of loyalty, proof of a bond written in blood. On the remote Sepik River in Papua New Guinea, young men did not simply marry a woman. First, they had to marry the crocodile. In this tribe, crocodiles were seen as sacred ancestors, powerful spirits that lived between water and land. To prove they were worthy husbands, boys went through a ritual that carved their bodies forever. They were taken to a secret house. There, elders used sharpened bamboo knives to cut deep patterns across their skin, hundreds of slices. Blood poured freely, and the boys clenched their teeth in silence. The cuts were arranged in rows, so when they healed, the scars looked like crocodile scales. Only after surviving this ordeal was a man considered ready for marriage. The pain was not just physical. For days, their bodies burned with fever. Insects crawled on the wounds, and infection was common. But if they lived, they emerged as crocodile men, half human, half spirit. Only then could they claim a bride. For the tribe, marriage was not about love.
It was about transformation, a union blessed by the jaws of a crocodile. In India, astrology often guides marriage, but for those born under the Mongolic curse, marriage was said to bring disaster, death, divorce, or endless misery. The solution? Before marrying a human, they had to marry a tree. Picture the scene. A young woman dressed in bridal clothes stands beside a banana tree or a sacred peepal tree. Priests chant mantras as a red cloth is tied between her and the trunk. Vermilion is applied, garlands are exchanged, and offerings are made as if the tree were a living groom. When the ritual ends, the tree is cut down and destroyed. Why? Because the curse was believed to transfer into the tree. Only after the symbolic wedding was the woman considered safe for her real husband. But beneath the chants and flowers, the message was chilling. Her fate was dangerous, her existence a burden, and only by binding her to a tree could society accept her as a wife. A marriage not for love, not for joy, but to trick the stars themselves. In the wide plains of Kenya and Tanzania, the Maasai tribe carried a wedding ritual that outsiders could barely understand. Here, blessing the bride did not mean a kiss on the forehead or a gentle prayer. It meant spitting on her. As the ceremony began, the father of the bride stood tall, holding his staff. The young woman, dressed in beads and bright cloth, bowed her head. Then, in front of everyone, her father spat directly on her face and chest. For the Maasai, spit was not insult, it was sacred, a symbol of life, fortune, and protection. By spitting, the father was believed to pass on strength and ward off evil. But the ritual did not end there. When the bride walked to her husband's home, women from the village sometimes spat on her too, coating her with layers of blessing. Each drop was a strange prayer, sticky and real. To outsiders, it looked humiliating. To the Maasai, it was love, a marriage sealed not with gold or rings, but with spit, carrying the weight of tradition. In the mountains of Kyrgyzstan, love was not always chosen. Sometimes it was stolen. The ritual was called alakachu, bride kidnapping. A man who wanted a wife would not always ask her. Instead, he and his friends would grab her from the street, force her into a car, and drive her to his home. There, the women of his family pulled her inside, covering her head with a white scarf. This scarf meant only one thing. She was now his bride. The girl screamed, cried, begged to leave, but tradition said her tears were normal, even expected. Elders believed resistance was only a sign of modesty. In many cases, the girl eventually gave in, trapped by shame and social pressure. By the next day, a wedding was arranged. Her consent did not matter. Her silence was treated as agreement. For centuries, this practice was defended as culture, but behind the colorful weddings was a cruel truth. Many marriages began with abduction, and many lives were bound in chains disguised as tradition. In ancient China, some marriages did not move forward until the chickens gave their answer. Yes, the fate of two people rested on the liver of a bird. Before the wedding, a chicken was slaughtered. Its liver was pulled out and examined by elders. If the liver looked smooth and healthy, the marriage was blessed to succeed. If it was dark, shriveled, or marked with spots, the wedding was delayed, or even canceled. The couple stood in silence as old hands probed the slimy organ, searching for signs from the heavens. Every future dream, children, wealth, long life, was tied to that dripping piece of flesh. Sometimes, if the result was bad, families tried again with another chicken, but each cut brought more fear. How many livers would it take before fate agreed? A wedding built not on love, not on choice, but on the hidden message of a chicken's heart.
In rural villages of India, when the rains failed and the fields cracked open, people turned to an unusual marriage. They married frogs. The ceremony looked like any other wedding. A male frog and a female frog were dressed in tiny clothes. Priests recited mantras, garlands were placed around their necks, and drums echoed through the streets. Villagers cheered as the frogs were carried like honored guests. Why? Because it was believed that the marriage of frogs would please the rain gods. Their croaking was seen as a sacred song, calling clouds to gather in the sky. Sometimes the frogs were even fed special meals after the wedding, as if they were newlyweds beginning their life together. When the rains finally came, people believed the frogs' union had worked. To outsiders, it looked strange, even absurd. But for farmers staring at dry land and dying crops, this bizarre ritual carried hope. A marriage not of love, but of survival.
In parts of Sudan, death did not end a man's duty to marry. If a man died before his wedding, his family would not let his bloodline vanish. Instead, a living brother or close male relative stepped in. He would marry a wife in the dead man's name. The children born from that union were not considered the husbands, but the ghosts. They carried the name and legacy of the man buried beneath the earth. The ceremony itself was chilling. Guests gathered and prayers were said, not for the living couple, but for the absent groom. A shadow was treated as a groom, a memory given flesh through tradition. For the bride, this meant being tied to a man she would never see. Her husband was alive, yet not her own. Her children would belong to another. It was a marriage where the living became vessels for the dead, a ritual that blurred the line between family, duty, and ghostly possession. On the cold steppes of Mongolia, love was not sealed with rings or kisses. It was sealed with scissors. Before marriage, the bride and groom sat together while elders brought out a blade. A lock of hair from each was cut and tied together with thread. The belief was powerful. Once their hair was joined, their lives could never be separated. But the ritual had a darker side. In Mongol culture, cutting hair was not a small act. It was a symbol of mourning, of loss, of surrender. By cutting their hair, the couple gave up their old selves. They were no longer individuals. They belonged to each other and to the tribe. The strands were sometimes buried in the earth or burned in the fire, binding the marriage to the spirits of nature. And once the hair was cut, there was no return. The union was permanent, as unbreakable as the endless steppe winds. A marriage sealed not by choice, but by sacrifice.
In old Czech villages, a wedding night was never private. The community believed they had a right to test the couple. After the ceremony, the bride was placed in her new home. Guests gathered around laughing and drinking, but their eyes were fixed on her. Then came the ritual. Someone took off her shoes and threw them across the room. If the shoes landed well, facing upward, side by side, it was a sign of good fortune. The marriage would be strong, the home filled with children. But if the shoes landed poorly, turned upside down or apart, it was seen as a curse, a bad omen for the union. Sometimes the ritual went further. Friends of the groom teased the bride, forcing her to fetch the shoes or even throwing them again and again until the result pleased the crowd. What was meant as laughter carried an edge of cruelty. For the young bride, her dignity balanced on the fall of her shoes. A marriage judged not by love, but by chance.
In medieval France, a wedding did not end at the altar. The true proof of marriage was expected in the bedroom. When the bride and groom were taken to their chamber, they were not left alone. Family members, nobles, even priests sometimes gathered outside, or worse, inside the room. Their task? To witness the consummation of the marriage. The bed was blessed with prayers and holy water, as if the act itself were a religious ritual. Curtains were drawn, but whispers filled the air. Some witnesses even demanded to see the sheets afterward, stained with blood, as proof of the bride's purity. Imagine the fear of a young woman on that night. Her body was not her own. It was a public contract, a spectacle for others. If the proof was missing, the marriage could be annulled, the bride shamed, her family disgraced. What should have been private became theater. A marriage turned into a trial. Love replaced with humiliation, sanctified by tradition.
Across different regions of Africa, strange marriages were sometimes arranged not between two people, but between a person and an animal. In one tribe, if a girl was born under a cursed sign, elders believed she had to be married to a goat or a dog before she could marry a man. The ritual was simple yet chilling. The animal was dressed with cloth, beads, or even a crown of flowers. The girl was led to it, and symbolic vows were performed. Once the ceremony was complete, the animal was either released or, in darker cases, sacrificed. The belief was that the curse would leave the girl and enter the animal, freeing her for a real husband. But behind the chants and the drums was a cruel truth. The girl's fate was reduced to a ritual, her dignity tied to an animal's life. To outsiders, it was bizarre. To the community, it was survival against unseen forces. A marriage where love meant nothing and superstition ruled everything.
In old Korean tradition, the groom did not simply walk into marriage. He had to prove his strength with his feet. After the wedding ceremony, the groom was held down by his friends. His shoes were removed and a wooden stick or dried fish was brought out. Then the beating began. His bare feet were struck again and again while the crowd laughed and cheered. The pain was sharp, the soles burning, but the groom was expected to endure it without protest. The ritual was seen as a test. Could he withstand hardship? Could he carry the weight of marriage? Could he be strong enough to please his bride? Sometimes questions were shouted at him during the beating, and he had to answer with wit despite the pain. It was half humiliation, half challenge. But for the village, it was proof. A groom who could not endure sore feet could not endure the trials of a family. A marriage sealed with laughter on the surface, but written in bruises beneath.
In the remote highlands of the Philippines, some tribes had a marriage ritual that shocked even their neighbors. The bride's family did not always bring gold, cloth, or cattle. Sometimes they offered a dead rat. The animal, freshly killed, was laid before the groom's family. Its tiny body, stiff and lifeless, was wrapped in leaves or placed on a plate. Why? Because to them, the rat symbolized survival. It proved that the bride's family knew how to hunt, how to feed themselves, how to endure in a harsh world. The ritual was small, but the meaning was heavy. Accepting the rat meant accepting the bride. Rejecting it was an insult that could break the alliance. So a single creature, filthy to some, sacred to others, became the bridge between two families. A marriage tied not with gold or wealth, but with the body of a dead rat. In rural Scotland, brides were not covered in silk or jewels before their wedding. They were covered in filth. The ritual was called blackening. On the night before the wedding, friends and family ambushed the bride. She was dragged into the street as laughter echoed all around. Then came the buckets, filled with soot, ashes, rotten eggs, spoiled milk, dead fish, and anything foul they could find. The bride was smeared from head to toe, her hair sticky, her skin burning from the stench. Sometimes she was tied to a tree or paraded through the village so everyone could witness her humiliation. The belief was simple. If she could endure this shame, she could endure the hardships of marriage. It was meant as a test, but also as a public spectacle, turning a sacred moment into cruel entertainment. By dawn, the bride stood broken, covered in filth, yet still expected to smile on her wedding day. A marriage not born of romance, but of endurance through humiliation. In the heart of ancient Rome, some weddings were sealed, not with rings, but with blood. During certain ceremonies, a drop of blood was taken from the bride. Sometimes it was drawn from her arm, sometimes from a small cut on her skin. That blood was then offered to the gods or smeared as a sacred mark during the vows. The belief was chilling. Blood was life itself. By giving it up, the bride surrendered her past and bound her soul to her husband's house. But the ritual did not stop there. In darker accounts, the groom too gave blood, cutting his hand so that both drops could be mixed together, symbolizing a union that could never be broken. The crowd watched as the red stains marked the beginning of the marriage. To them, it was purity, sacrifice, and divine blessing. To the couple, it was pain turned into destiny. A marriage not only before people, but before the gods, written in blood.